The world had gone quiet. It wasn't the silence of peace, but the suffocating hush of uncertainty, millions glued to screens, radios, and phones, listening to a voice that should never have reached Earth. The signal came from beyond the solar system, carried on frequencies no human nation had ever claimed. It wasn't encrypted in any military code, nor wrapped in diplomatic niceties. It was raw. Unfiltered. A broadcast meant to be heard by all. At first, the message was garbled, distorted by the static of interstellar distance. Engineers at NASA, the European Space Agency, and even amateur radio hobbyists across the globe scrambled to stabilize it. When they did, the voice was impossibly clear. It was not human. To the conquered world designated Sol 3, the voice declared, each syllable vibrating with metallic resonance, like thunder echoing in a hollow chamber. You belong to us. Your leaders have refused our offers of assimilation. For this disobedience, we shall demonstrate the fate of your kind. The transmission didn't end with words. Screens across the planet flickered to new images, grainy but unmistakable. A chamber filled with cages. Inside them were humans. Men, women, and children, pale and bruised, huddled together under harsh lights. Their clothes were torn, their faces hollowed by starvation, their eyes full of terror. Some cried. Some sat silent, broken. The alien voice returned. This is what becomes of those who resist. They are ours. And soon, all of you will be. The silence that followed was unbearable. Not a soul on Earth breathed. In Washington, D.C., President David Walker sat in the White House Situation Room, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the table. The nation's top brass generals, admirals, intelligence directors watched the footage in horrified disbelief. "They're alive," whispered General Marcus Harlow, head of U.S. Strategic Command. His usually steady baritone cracked with rage. "My God, they've had our people all along." Across the ocean, in a modest Chicago apartment, investigative journalist Sarah Connors dropped her coffee mug. It shattered on the hardwood floor, but she barely noticed. She was too focused on the screen, on the terrified face of a little girl gripping the bars of a cage. Sarah's mind screamed as recognition struck. She had seen that child before in a missing persons case she had covered years ago. The girl had vanished without a trace. In Houston, NASA engineer Daniel Reyes rewound the transmission feed for the 15th time, staring at every frame. His hands shook, not from fear, but from fury. These weren't actors. These weren't fabricated images. He spotted details only a trained eye could see: the unique flicker of fluorescent lights, the bruising patterns consistent with human biology, the unmistakable Earth-made clothing. These were real people. Abducted. Tortured. Displayed. Across the globe, people recognized faces. Lost loved ones, missing soldiers, vanished scientists, and children who had simply disappeared off the streets. For decades, humanity whispered stories of abductions, lights in the sky, unexplained vanishings. Now the whispers were undeniable truth. The reaction was instant. Explosive. Within hours, riots broke out in major cities. Grief-stricken families stormed police stations and government offices, demanding answers. News anchors trembled on air, voices shaking as they tried to remain composed. Social media erupted into a frenzy, hashtags of vengeance, unity, and resistance climbing faster than any in history. But the most dangerous reaction wasn't grief. It was fury. President Walker stood at the head of the table, his jaw set, eyes burning. "We can't ignore this. Not anymore. This isn't conspiracy. This isn't theory. They've been taking our people for decades. And now they're taunting us with proof." General Harlow leaned forward, veins bulging in his temples. "Mr. President, if this footage is genuine, and every bone in my body says it is, then we are at war. They've declared it, whether they realize it or not." "War with who?" muttered Secretary of State Linda Rowe, her voice trembling. "We don't even know what they are, what they want, what they can do. We're human," Walker cut in, his voice sharp as steel. "That's what we are. And I'll be damned if I let them cage us like cattle."
For the first time in generations, humanity had a common enemy.
Borders, ideologies, rivalries all seemed meaningless in the face of the cages.
The broadcast didn't unite governments. It united people.
In Chicago, Sarah Connors opened her laptop and began typing faster than she had in her life, her journalist instincts burning.
She wasn't just going to report the story. She was going to ignite the world with it.
In Houston, Daniel Reyes called his colleagues at NASA. His voice was calm, but beneath it burned an unstoppable determination.
If they think we're helpless, they're wrong. We've got more than rockets. We've got ideas. And ideas are how humanity wins wars.
Across military bases, research facilities, and civilian households, the fire spread. Men and women who had grown up divided suddenly spoke the same language: rage. The cages weren't just an insult. They were a promise. And humanity was done being passive.
President Walker's voice thundered across the emergency broadcast network by midnight.
To whoever is listening beyond our world, you have made a grave mistake. You have shown us the fate you intend for our children. You have awakened something in us that cannot be stopped.
We will find you. We will bring them home.
And we will show you what humanity truly is. The world roared in response. For the first time in human history, Earth was united not by fear, but by fury. And fury, once awakened, was unstoppable. The next morning, the world did not wake up as it had the day before. Factories that had been idle for years roared back to life. Shipyards, aerospace companies, even automobile plants switched production overnight.
Governments invoked emergency powers not seen since the Second World War.
But this time, there was no enemy across an ocean, no foreign flag to topple. There was a sky full of stars, and somewhere beyond them, the monsters who had caged humanity's children.
President David Walker didn't sleep.
The White House Situation Room became a war council chamber. Screens displayed satellite maps, launch schedules, and research blueprints that had been locked away for decades.
Projects once deemed too expensive or too provocative were dragged out of classified vaults.
Project Aegis, said General Marcus Harlow, sliding a thick folder across the table to the president.
Defense initiative from the Reagan era. Prototype orbital railguns. Never deployed.
We could have operational platforms inside 6 months if we push manufacturing at full tilt.
Walker opened the folder, eyes scanning the schematics. Do it. Fund it.
I want those guns in orbit yesterday. And this, Harlow continued, placing another file down, is Project Sentinel. Deep space detection array, 15 times more powerful than anything we currently have. If we're going to find where that broadcast came from, we'll need Sentinel online. Approved, Walker said without hesitation. If Congress complains, tell them to come look at those cages.
Far from Washington, ordinary people mobilized in their own ways.
Sarah Connors hadn't left her apartment since the broadcast, her fingers blistered from hours of typing. Her article went live at dawn, titled, "They Took Us.
Now we're taking back the stars." It wasn't just journalism, it was a battle cry.
Within hours, it became the most shared piece in the history of online media, translated into 100 languages, read aloud in streets, schools, and war rooms. Her phone buzzed endlessly, calls from editors, government liaisons, grieving families, but she ignored most of them.
She was too busy digging.
The cages haunted her, but they also guided her. She cross-referenced the faces she saw with decades of missing persons reports, constructing a list of names.
Names mattered.
They turned the victims from statistics into people. By nightfall, she had identified 37 of the captives.
37 stolen lives. 37 reasons for vengeance.
Meanwhile, in Houston, Daniel Reyes found himself at the center of a storm he had never imagined.
His calm demeanor and reputation for solving impossible problems earned him a seat at NASA's newly formed Defense Coordination Task Force.
What we need, Daniel told the room full of scientists and military officers, is a way to hit back.
Not just launch probes or satellites. We need a ship, a real one, that can leave the solar system and come back. A senior colonel frowned. That's science fiction. Daniel looked him dead in the eye. So was walking on the moon. Until we did it. Silence fell across the table.
Then, one by one, heads began to nod. They opened sealed blueprints, designs for experimental propulsion drives, nuclear pulse engines, even concepts once dismissed as fantasy, Alcubierre warp bubbles, antimatter containment units. If we combine everything we've learned in the last 50 years, Daniel said, pointing at the screen, we could have a ship capable of reaching that broadcast source within 2 years.
2 years, the colonel repeated. Daniel's jaw tightened. Then we make it 1.
For the first time, the impossible felt like a deadline.
But fury is a dangerous fuel. Riots still burned in cities worldwide, some targeting government buildings, others erupting against corporations accused of covering up alien contact for decades.
In Los Angeles, protesters stormed an aerospace contractor's HQ, chanting "Give us the ships," before security forces broke them up. President Walker addressed the nation again that night, this time flanked by General Harlow and Secretary Rowe. "My fellow Americans," he began, his face drawn but resolute, "today we take our first steps toward justice. We will find every man, woman, and child taken from us. We will bring them home. And we will make those responsible pay the price. This is not a war of conquest. This is a war of return. Every factory, every laboratory, every launch facility in this country is now part of that mission. Together, we will build the spear that reaches the stars." The speech was carried live worldwide, echoed by other leaders who pledged their resources, their scientists, their soldiers. Humanity's divisions began to blur, not perfectly, not everywhere, but enough. Enough to matter. In the weeks that followed, the first launches thundered into the sky, massive rockets carrying components for orbital shipyards. Nations that had never cooperated before shared data and blueprints. Chinese engineers worked alongside American scientists. Russian cosmonauts trained side by side with European astronauts. In Chicago, Sarah Connors received an encrypted message. "Unknown sender, you want the truth? Meet me. Midnight. Warehouse 14, Navy Pier." It was insane. Dangerous. But Sarah went. She found a man waiting in the shadows, his face hidden by a hood. When he spoke, his voice was low, urgent. "They've been here longer than you think," he said. "Your government knows more than it's telling you. The abductions, there were patterns. They targeted scientists, pilots, engineers. People they thought were valuable." Sarah's breath caught. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because the cages were just the beginning," the man replied. "They aren't just trying to scare us. They're preparing for something bigger. And if we don't move fast, we won't have a planet left to save." Before she could ask another question, the man disappeared into the night. Sarah stood alone, heart hammering. The fury that had burned in her chest since the broadcast now became something sharper, colder. Humanity was mobilizing, but so was the enemy. And somewhere out there, the captives were still waiting. 2 years after the broadcast, Earth no longer looked the same. From orbit, the planet glowed with a new constellation, massive orbital shipyards, defense platforms, and shining fleets taking shape above the clouds. Humanity had become something it had never been before, united, focused, dangerous. The spear President Walker had promised was finished. It was called Valkyrie, a warship unlike anything Earth had ever built. 2 miles of reinforced alloy and composite plating, its hull bristled with railguns, missile batteries, and the first functional plasma lances ever constructed. Its heart was a prototype warp engine, Daniel Reyes' masterpiece, capable of folding space itself. The day of launch felt more like a holy event than a military operation. Millions lined the coasts to watch. Billions tuned in to broadcasts. Daniel stood in Valkyrie's engine room, one hand resting on the console as if feeling the ship's pulse. He had lived inside this project for 2 relentless years, eating, sleeping, breathing nothing but the ship. The faces from the cages haunted him every night, driving him forward. "You ready, Reyes?" a voice called from the hatch. It was Commander Rachel Stone, Valkyrie's captain and Air Force pilot chosen to lead Earth's first interstellar strike mission. Daniel nodded once. "Let's bring them home." On the bridge, Captain Stone stood before the massive viewing window.
Valkyrie, this is Control. Final clearance granted. Bring her to life. The warp core flared, bathing the room in blue light. Reality rippled. And then Earth fell away.
For the first time, humanity left the solar system not as explorers, not as diplomats, but as avengers. The alien world was nothing like Earth, an arid wasteland under a green sun, dotted with metallic cities that rose like fangs from the ground. The source of the broadcast had been traced here, to a facility deep inside one of those cities.
Valkyrie dropped out of warp above the planet, her weapons hot. Contacts, shouted Tactical Officer Jenna Lee. Multiple hostiles launching from surface. Engage, Stone ordered. The sky lit up.
Railgun slugs tore through alien interceptors, shattering them into burning fragments.
Plasma lances cut enemy carriers clean in half.
The first missiles ever fired in interstellar war streaked downward, punching holes through the planet's defense grid. In the engine room, Daniel felt every vibration of the ship's fury. This was what humanity had built her for. This was payback. Surface facility in range, Lee reported. Target the broadcast center, Stone said, her voice like iron. They wanted us to see their cages, let them see our answer.
Valkyrie fired.
The blast turned the broadcast center into a crater.
But they weren't done. Stone led a ground team down to the planet's surface, armored and armed.
Daniel went with them, he had insisted on being there when they opened the cages.
Sarah Connors joined them too, press credentials be damned.
She had spent 2 years turning missing persons into a global movement, and she refused to stay behind when the moment finally came. The facility's interior was a nightmare, rows of cages stretching for hundreds of yards, just like in the broadcast.
Inside were humans, some too weak to stand, some clinging to life.
When the soldiers cut the locks and opened the doors, there were no cheers at first.
Just stunned silence.
Then the first child stepped forward. She was no older than 9. Her hair was matted, her face thin, but her eyes were still human. She reached for the soldier's gloved hand.
And humanity wept. Sarah recorded everything, tears running down her face.
"You're going home," she whispered to them, though she wasn't sure they could even understand anymore.
"You're going home." The rescue took hours.
Thousands were freed, abductees from every nation, some missing for months, some for decades.
But the enemy wasn't finished. Alarms blared as alien reinforcements swarmed the city. Stone's team fell back to the landing zone under heavy fire. Daniel stayed behind just long enough to overload the facility's power core. "Go!"
Stone shouted, dragging him toward the shuttle. The explosion leveled the compound, erasing every trace of the cages except the people who had survived. When Valkyrie rose into orbit, she left behind a burning reminder of humanity's fury.
The war didn't end that day.
But the galaxy had been warned. Weeks later, President Walker addressed the United Nations as the rescued captives, now clothed and fed, sat in the front row. 2 years ago, we were shown our future, Walker said, his voice carrying across the chamber and the billions watching worldwide. A future where humanity lived in chains.
That future is gone. We have brought our people home. And we will never be taken again.
The chamber erupted in applause. In Houston, Daniel Reyes returned to his lab, already sketching the next generation of warp drives. In Chicago, Sarah Connors published the last chapter of her series, titled The Day We Took Back the Stars.
It became the most read article in human history.
And above the Earth, Valkyrie continued to orbit, scarred, battle-tested, and ready.
The galaxy now knew the truth. Humanity was awake. Humanity was united.
And humanity was unstoppable.